Hello and welcome to the Toronto Debating Society debate for the night of December 8th, 2009. The motion being debated tonight is that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And I don't know about all of you, but as I introduce my Prime Minister, I can't help but think of the book of Acts, specifically chapter 9, verse 29, where it goes on to say, "And he spoke boldly in the name of the Lord Jesus and debated against the Hellenists, but they attempted to kill him." For a slightly less violent and nonetheless equally interesting debate, I'm pleased to introduce the Prime Minister, Gerry.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition, I'm going to start by giving you our definition of the proposition tonight. The Catholic Church is... Oh, I don't even have that. Sorry about that. Sure. The Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. Whoa. By Catholic Church, we mean the Roman Catholic Church and its affiliated schools and organizations, as well as the members of that church. By is, we mean now, December the 8th, 2009. By force, we refer to a means of producing, and by good, we mean positive outcomes. The world, countries and nations as we know them. So, to reiterate, the Catholic Church is a means of producing positive outcomes in the world. Before I set out my arguments, I would like to begin by talking about good and evil. Many people throughout history have viewed the world as a grounds for the struggle between good and evil. Whether this is true or not, most of us would agree that there is both good and evil present in life. Now, we of the government are not suggesting that the Catholic Church is only full of good. Any large organization, whether religious or not, contains both good and bad members. It would be very naive of us to think that an organization of more than 1 billion people does not contain its share of evil. What we are simply saying is that the good produced by the Church overwhelmingly outweighs the evil done by some of its members, and that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And now to my arguments. My first argument has to do with the individuals in the Church. There are over 1.2 billion people in the world in the Catholic Church, and they rely on the Catholic Church for their spiritual leadership. Most of these people are from third world countries, and such live close to poverty and have little education. The Church gives these people guidance, hope, and leadership. The Church promises salvation to its believers, and in many poor peasant villages, that is a very important anchor for them to hold on to. The Church gives its members a sense of worth. This makes the Catholic Church a force for good in the world. My second argument has to do with education. The Catholic Church has a leadership role in the education of the people who belong to the Church. The Church provides social programs and institutions throughout the world, including hospitals, universities, schools, missions, orphanages, and Catholic relief organizations, and many others. As an example of this, there are over 1,000 Catholic universities in the world. There are over 8,000 orphanages and over 14,000 old age homes, as well as many other institutions and organizations. The Catholic Church operates the largest non-governmental school system in the world. A main doctrine of the Catholic Church, as taught in this school system, is do unto others as you would have done unto you. This is a message that is sadly lacking in today's world. The church schools often provide food and lodging for their students, and this is a relief to some of the poor families that these students come from. For all of these reasons, this makes the Church a force for good in the world. My third argument, the Catholic Church is the center of the community in many towns and villages throughout the world. People rely on the Church for organization and leadership in their community. The church provides for volunteering and promotes giving time, materials, and money in help of others. The church actively runs many Catholic charities which help people all over the world. The Catholic Church charities are the #1 charitable organization in the entire world. All of these reasons make the Catholic Church a force for good. My fourth argument has to do with the church and its very, very big influence on the world stage. The church actively fights against things such as infanticide, divorce, incest, polygamy, and marital infidelity. The church sponsors the Academy of Sciences, of which Stephen Hawking is a member. Their mission is scientific discovery. The church supports politicians all over the world who protect early life and promote family life. They also support leaders who fight for social justice and the poor. For all of these varied reasons, the church produces positive outcomes and is thus a force for good in the world. For all of these reasons that I have stated, I would ask you to vote with the government in favor of this proposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your opinion, Mr. Gerry. And as I introduce the next speaker, the leader of the opposition, to counter some of these points, I'm instantly drawn to the book of 2 Thessalonians, chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. The man of sin is revealed, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he may sit as God and show that he is God. Well, hoping to attain this lofty goal is the leader of the opposition, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for that lofty introduction, or should I say Angel Gabriel for that lofty introduction. The government would have you believe that the good that the Catholic Church does overwhelmingly outweighs the evil, and they bring up 3 arguments, and they define it as today. I mean, the church, in terms of today, is a force for good. They state that it provides 1.2 billion. It provides the leadership, spiritual leadership of 1.2 billion people in the world, and that it also gives guidance and leadership and salvation to people, especially in the third world. That's very interesting, because what the Catholic Church in the third world does not give are things like advice on birth control, advice on things like how to prevent AIDS and HIV. It does not give them advice which contradicts the teachings of the Catholic Church, which may shorten their life. And let's consider this. May shorten their life. The opposition doesn't believe that that is a force for good, especially if, as they say, these options that they are giving people are over 1.2 billion people, especially in the third world. I mean, in terms of, for example, preventing the spread of HIV and AIDS, Pope Benedict XXVI actually said that, well, although condoms may not solve the problem of AIDS, they may, in certain cases, aggravate it. Aggravate the problem of AIDS by giving condoms to people to prevent them from catching HIV. We don't believe that is a force of good as it now stands. We don't believe that it is a force of good that the Catholic Church's views on women, for example. That women are not consigned to be leaders in the Catholic Church, but instead are consigned to be nuns. They're consigned to be followers. They're consigned not to take an equal place in the worship of God, but instead a subservient place. We don't believe that is a force of good. We don't believe that spreading discrimination throughout the world is a force of good. The government also made a point that the Catholic Church provides a lot of help for hospitals, in terms of their hospitals, in terms of their orphanages, in terms of their church schools. My partner will bring up exactly what happens in some of these hospitals, what happens in some of these church schools in regards to pedophilia. However, in terms of the hospital, it's very interesting. A Catholic hospital, some Catholic hospitals will not give out birth control. They will not counsel their patients on abortion. They will not counsel patients who have AIDS or HIV. They will treat their patients who are gay with disdain. And why is that? Because it goes against the doctrinal teachings of the Catholic Church. We don't believe it's a force of good that people are allowed to die in the doctrinal and religious purity of the Catholic Church. Furthermore, we also believe that in terms of the Catholic Church providing a, for example, center of a community, that has allowed for the Catholic Church to be a too dominant force. However, the government also made an interesting point about the social activism of the Catholic Church in terms of their presence on the world stage, how they fight against polygamy, they support early life, and they promote leaders which promote the general welfare. However, what the Catholic Church also does, and which is what the government hasn't mentioned, the Catholic Church also interferes with women's right to choose. They interfere with politicians who actually believe that they are elected in a democracy and not a theocracy. We do not believe it is good for the Catholic Church to advocate things that are good for just the church as opposed to things that are good for everybody. And some might say that, well, the people who go to the Catholic Church are innocent of all of these things. We don't believe that. We believe that even though the Catholic Church may provide leadership and spiritual guidance for 1.2 billion people, those 1.2 billion people need to know exactly what they're in for. They need to know that by attending church, by participating in the Catholic rites, by participating in the structure of the Catholic Church, by giving the Catholic Church money, that they condone and provide aid and comfort to the clergy and to the organizational structure of the Catholic Church to do all of these things, to sin against what is right and good in the world. Mr. Speaker, we don't subscribe to the belief that the Catholic Church is a force of good. We firmly believe that because of the discrimination it shows against women, because of the discrimination it shows against gays and lesbians, because of the discrimination it shows in other religions, because of how they ignore the basic tenets of science in terms of preventing disease, in terms of preventing overpopulation, in terms of helping the world mature and grow in a good way. We don't think this resolution should stand. We don't think the government's resolution should stand at all. As I said, the member opposite will go into the other problems of the Catholic Church in terms of pedophilia, in terms of what the Church has condoned and how it treats its people in hospitals, how it treats kids in schools, how it treats kids in orphanages, how it treats kids who rely on the safety and thought they relied on the goodness of the Catholic Church to protect them. So just to conclude, Mr. Speaker, we do not believe that the Catholic Church is a force for good. We do not believe that it provides the proper leadership or the proper example for the 1.2 billion people it supposedly leads. We do not believe that the social programs it provides in terms of hospitals, relief organizations, orphanages is a force for good because of how they abuse their position and because of how they take the doctrine of the Catholic Church above everything else, even when it means people are going to die quicker, sooner, and in more pain. We do not believe that the Catholic Church is the center of the community. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we do not believe that the Catholic Church is a force for good on the world stage because it tries to usurp democracy in place of trying to instill a theocracy. Thank you.
And now to second the notion that a skilled debater not only has the privilege of always being right, but also the privilege of a little bit of divine intervention. Please welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, the debate before us tonight is whether or not the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. And the opposition will have you believe that, that you have to look at specific individual things only and determine that based on 10 or 12 or 2 or 3 different things that you can make an assumption of the whole thing. Now, as far as science goes, he claims that the church is against science, but that's a bad scientific principle. You're only going to take 2 or 3 examples and make a huge suggestion for something. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue of the spiritual leadership of 1.2 billion people around the world is the spiritual leadership by the church, but not only by the people who run the church, but the people who are part of the church, ladies and gentlemen. As my colleague stated, the church itself is not just the body of priests and of nuns and the Pope and the like. It is the lay people, regular folks who go to church, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, these people do produce good outcomes, positive outcomes, and are a good force in the world. In dealing with society as a whole, one issue that was brought up as being the center of the community, being too dominant a force and not really socially active against certain things. Well, I would suggest that in Central America in the 60s and 70s, the Catholic Church was a very, very, very strong force against corrupt governments, ladies and gentlemen, that killed people, disappeared them, ladies and gentlemen. But the church stood up against these corrupt governments as a force in the community to say, we do not believe what you are doing is right. We should be protecting the people, whether they are Catholic or not, whether they are poor or not, and standing up for the goodness of the community against the evil of these dictators, as it were. The issue of advice on birth control and advice on AIDS. Well, ladies and gentlemen, yes, that has been a Catholic stance for the longest time because life is holy to the Catholic Church and that condom use is forbidden to the Catholic Church. But ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest to you that in the clinics where nuns and religious people work, and people who are connected as Catholics with the Church but are not necessarily in power, that suggesting that birth control is a good idea may not always not be done. Many people do things against the Catholic Church while being part of the Catholic Church, ladies and gentlemen, and it may not be sanctioned by those above, but it may in fact be in the better interests of society and the individuals that the person is talking with. So, while it may be against the Catholic Church in the big picture, ladies and gentlemen, at a local level, at an individual level, people in the church tend to be more pragmatic than doctrinal and dogmatic and focused with the blinders on. The issue of hospitals and church hospitals and the like, the pedophilia that is there. Well, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, rampant sexual abuse in schools and orphanages has been brought up. But again, that's not all the orphanages, and it's not all the schools, and it's not all the priests, and it's not all the nuns, ladies and gentlemen. But they will select those examples as, well, it's a force for bad. Ladies and gentlemen, there were Germans who fought against the Nazis in World War II. But if you look at Germany as a whole, it was a bad country. But they saved the Jews, they saved the Christians, they saved other people because it was the right thing to do, ladies and gentlemen. So making a blanket statement that all the Germans were bad, or all the Nazis were bad, well, sure, lots of them were, but there were some who weren't. So likewise, ladies and gentlemen, we focus on the good works of these people. The issue of women's right to choose. This is a struggle in the Catholic Church. Absolutely. And it has taken time. But this is a 1,000-year-old institution, ladies and gentlemen. Slavery was not abolished immediately in the United States. But ladies and gentlemen, after discussion and reasoned discussion with many people, it was decided that slavery is not a good thing and that all men should be free, including men of color. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope for a day when the Catholic Church accepts women as priests. The other churches in the world do. But ladies and gentlemen, for the time being, it does give women in the church an opportunity to help in the laity as nuns, sisters, and the like, to help the priests in the church. No, it may not be being a priest, but ladies and gentlemen, that's not all there is in life. Ladies and gentlemen, the Catholic Church is a force for good.
Thank thank you to our government secretary, not the opposition secretary, government secretary, to introduce our opposition secretary, who is coming up to, in an ironic twist, preach his points to the church, as it were. Please welcome the opposition secretary, Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, surely the angels must be weeping, and Galileo must be spinning in his grave, I'm sure, to hear the Czech Catholic Church support scientific efforts. But let's go back to the Prime Minister's original statements. He mentioned that the Catholic Church brings salvation to the poor of the world. The assumption here, of course, is that they need it. After all, in the Catholic view, they were born stained, tainted, with original sin. They have to be saved, and the Catholic Church saves them. Hallelujah. Lenin one time said that the religion is the opiate of the people. Well, if you're poor and oppressed and life is brutish and short, certainly one looks to an afterlife. The Catholic Church has always held us up. It takes one's mind off the travails of this life and off its troubles. It also takes your mind off the fact that you're shelling out a few dollars each month to support it. So, naturally, it spreads such messages. He mentions the leadership. And he actually mentioned, I was glad to hear, he mentioned Latin America. And he said that the Catholic Church fought on the side of the oppressed in Latin America in the 60s. Indeed, they did. Some of the priests did, and some of the bishops and such, certainly. But our friend that recently died, John Paul II, excommunicated the priests who wanted to take roles in the Sandinista government in Nicaragua and in El Salvador. Those who actually tried to organize the efforts and get political about it were excommunicated. Romero, I forget the name of the bishop, was assassinated right at the altar. The Catholic Church has always sided with the big battalions. They have always sided with the oppressor. Even in the Middle Ages, they were raping and pillaging the most fertile lands in France, side by side with the princes who were doing so, having God on their right, as they put it. The Catholic Church has always been the poor of history. It has always been. He mentions education. You may not remember this, but around about 2001, the Roman Catholic School Board for Toronto spent $700,000 in a recruitment campaign to get students into its schools. And its excuse at the time was that since each student would bring in $7,000 from Queen's Park, which is the provincial grant per kid, that if they got 100 students, they would have their $700,000 back. Somebody wrote a letter to the Star at the time saying, yes, but it's still 700 grand out of the Education Committee that disappears into advertising and public relations agencies. But the public didn't flinch at that, but a few years later when Mrs. Nunziata was caught with her hand in the cookie jar that they could getting married in the Caribbean or something like that on school board funds, it was a hullabaloo. But the bigger crime went unnoticed. He said that they support scientific efforts. Well, Galileo spent the last 10 years of his life under house arrest because he would not, or because he finally did recant and say that the sun went around the earth when the Inquisition was about to burn him to death at the stake, as they had done so with Bruno and so on. For years, they would not even give up a shred from the Shroud of Turin so that it could be subject to carbon dating to test its authenticity. They are behind the intelligent design efforts, the latest phase of anti-evolutionism in the States. They have stalled scientific efforts at every turn. The member of the government mentions the pedophilia and says, well, we can't count pedophilia because it's committed by members of the church and not the church per se. Well, what led to the pedophilia was the enforced celibacy on its clerical orders and the priests and brothers and nuns and so forth. And the celibacy goes back to about the 12th century when the church finally had to forbid the clergy to marry because the children of the clergy up to that point were claiming church grounds when the father had died. They were inheritors. They were heirs to the will. The church was losing ground. So again, to preserve church money, to preserve church property, church prestige, as my friend here pointed out, the Catholic Church will do anything. It's all about market share. Even the efforts in their charities are accompanied by prayer and by celebration of feasts and so forth. It's a game. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Very solid arguments on all 4 counts. Now to begin the summations, I would like to call back the member of the opposition who will be providing a 2-minute summary.
I hope the sign of my demotion isn't a sign of my arguments. But as leader of the opposition, I am grateful that the member of the government had the temerity to bring up the fact that in the 60s and 70s that the church provided strength against the oppressors. It is too bad that that same church did not provide any sort of resistance in World War II during the Holocaust and the extermination of the Jews. In Pope Pius XII, otherwise known as Hitler's Pope, many books, many scholarship have been written about this, but in short, this can be summarized by a phrase found in a book called The Catholic Church and the Holocaust, 1930 to 1965. Although he could not have halted the Holocaust, he could have communicated with the church leaders throughout Europe. He could have admonished those who disdained the Jewish people and encouraged all to provide shelter. The results would have been fewer Catholic collaborators and bystanders and more rescuers and fewer victims. This current Pope ignored anti-Semitism. He sought amnesty for atrocity perpetrators. He disapproved of the Catholic Church to reconcile with the Jews. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Mr. Speaker, the Catholic Church has had a long history of not being a force of good in the world. And quite frankly, if not standing up to the members of Germany who committed the Holocaust, my friends, how you can't come back from that. Another interesting thing that the member also said that the Catholic Church, the upper echelons, have a stricter view, have blinders on when it comes to certain policies, but these policies may not be followed by the lower members or the members actually working in the field. Well, I hate to disappoint the member of the government, but
Thank you to the opposition for that cliffhanger. And to summarize the debate as a whole, we would like to welcome the Prime Minister back to conclude his arguments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin just by reminding the Secretary of the Opposition of our definition. We are talking about the Catholic Church today, not the Middle Ages, not Galileo. That's not today's, those are not today's issues. One thing I'm brought to mind of is the Pope Pius XII in the Second World War, and I quote you from the Grolier Encyclopedia: wishing to preserve Vatican neutrality, fearing reprisals, and realizing his impotence to stop the Holocaust, Pius nonetheless acted on an individual basis to save many Jews and others with church ransoms, documents, and asylum. I would remind everybody that we are talking about a struggle between good and evil. We have clearly stated that there is both good and bad in all organizations, including the Catholic Church. However, my first argument, spiritual leadership, providing hope, guidance, and a sense of worth to its members. My second argument, education. Many social programs, the largest school system in the non-governmental world, provided to Catholic school children. Number 3, the center of community in many small towns and villages that it provides, providing its members with an opportunity to volunteer, and its huge share of the charity work done in the world. Number 4, the influence that is put forth on the world stage for the betterment of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. Please vote for the proposition. Thank you.
That concludes the debate portion of this meeting.
Well, this is going to be a fun one, because we disagree. And, right.
Shocking, really.
So who's the Protestant?
I'm a pagan, so I claim absolutely no affiliation here. But maybe the other adjudicator has some affiliation. So I gave the debate to the opposition. And I think that the debate was very, very well handled. We had a very good setup from the Prime Minister, and we had some really good arguments. I personally think that the seeds of the government's destruction were sown right away by saying that, quote, after the definition and so on and so on, overwhelmingly outweighs. That is what the Prime Minister set out to prove. And I think the opposition did a really good job proving that it was not overwhelmingly outweighed. They didn't bring up the fact that there are 8 billion people as opposed to 1.2 billion who may not just disagree but strongly disagree with what the Catholic Church is doing. We did hear quite a few opposing arguments as to why some people might not like the doctrine of the Catholic Church. And I personally, that went down very well. I've got some notes here. What if you disagree with the precepts of the Catholic Church? Would the Catholic Church help others? And the other one was 1.2 versus 8 or 9 billion people. So to me, the debate centered around, is it overwhelmingly outweighing the good that the Church does? Is it overwhelmingly outweighing the effects? Is it overwhelmingly for good? And to me, the opposition said no and proved no. I think if we go through it, the arguments went backwards and forwards pretty well. We had situations where the seconder of the government actually contradicted the Prime Minister by going back to the 1960s, and that was taken up by the member of the opposition. We decided to allow the opposition's point of view because it was brought up, but we didn't allow the opposition going off into medieval times unless he had said something like, well, as the member of government is bringing up historical stuff, we can also use this situation. And we have, what happened to the points of information, folks? Yeah. I mean, point of information, and we didn't have any. I started by marking down the side that didn't ask points of information, but then I just said, oh no, like ignore all of it because no one is asking points of information, which is a great shame because there's lots of stuff there that you could have asked, all sorts of things. So I thought that the debate worked very well. We ended up 2/3 of the way down my points list, which is a sign of how many points are brought up by various sides, and I ended up with 6, 7, 8. 8 points altogether, which is overworking it, but it can work. What I did find was that points were brought up and weren't really given enough evidence to prove those points. So there's a lot of situations where points were brought up and it's just obvious, so you just have to believe this. interestingly, the way that the opposition handled this, certainly Adrian handled it, was he didn't do the points one by one, which makes more sense. It appeared to be he had his speech already, went into that, and then opposed the government. So it's something that makes more sense to the adjudicators if you say, oppose this, oppose this, oppose that. Your speech actually opposed everything in there, but it was all over. It wasn't all over the place. It was very cogent, and it worked against it. But as a methodology, oppose, 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 and then you can do your summation of your own points. Another thing for Adrian, I'm afraid, I know you don't mind this, your summation. Out of order, out of order, out of order. A full 90 seconds of your 2 minutes had absolutely no impression on the adjudication because it was all that stuff that was new. The PM responded to that as that was also out of order, but he only took 30 seconds to oppose that. Oh, shut up. Now, I think it was a really good debate, so I'm more than happy to leave it to our opposing opinion here and see what you guys think in the vote. But I give it to these guys, with the best debater being Adrian. Now for an opposing point.
Ladies and gentlemen and debaters, good job tonight, gentlemen. That was not a very easy topic whatsoever, and yeah, good job on all of that. What stood out for Jim was the word overwhelming when Gerry said it towards the end of his definition, and it didn't stand out for me at all. It only stood out when Adrian referenced it. And I thought, why is he putting words in the government's mouth? But I did have it in my notes, so I know that he didn't do that. What for me stood out as being, as the opposition went through their argument, was the word good and how do you define good. And the government defined it as positive outcomes. And that good to me is, it's a word, you know, it's a, how do you define good? Well, we had it defined as positive outcomes, and we had it defined as today. So in my mind, when I saw this debate unfold, those were the two critical pieces that spoke. So just kind of dismantling the debate from my viewpoint, Gerry, Prime Minister, I really liked your definition. Actually, I thought the definition was straightforward. Both of you, I realized, worked on it. I thought it was straightforward, to the point. It's a complicated topic. We can debate the Catholic Church all year long, and I thought this was very specific for this topic. I liked your 4 points. Very easy. I thought there'd only be 3, so I was pleased that there was a 4th, actually. Got kudos on that one. Some interesting points, I thought, to point out for tonight. #1 charitable organization in the world. You had some good stats on the number of orphanages and old age homes. Yeah, I thought they were pretty solid and provided a good basis for this discussion. So moving over to the Leader of the Opposition, so Adrian, it was a good jump on the word overwhelming. I will give you that. It was a good jump on it. What I found, I agree with Jim in the way your argument was set up, but that was fine for me. It worked. The problem, it goes back to the word good. I found that the opposition said the Catholic Church is not good because it's not good. And okay, I may or may not personally agree with you, but I need more than that as a listener, or to sway my argument. I need more than it's not good because it's not good. There was a whole issue on women and nuns, and I'll just throw it out there as the one woman on stage right now. Nuns, you know, historically, if we go historical, there's pros and cons. We can debate that about all the various roles, but it's not necessarily bad to be a nun. It may not be our preference, and there may, you know, the 60s and 70s, they may have been evil creatures, and I may have, you know, nightmares about them personally, but they're not necessarily forces of evil. I'm just going to throw that out there, because I just was waiting for somebody to jump up and say, you know, there is a good nun out there.
Sound of music.
Moving over to Dean. Dean, what I really liked about yours, that's a good one actually, this Christmas time. That's the Christmas movie. I really like the way you pointed out holes by saying it's the individual, not the group. And I thought that was a really good stance to take it from. So that worked for me. Even the German Nazi comment, which I'm sure had some discussion while we were outside. Maybe I'm swayed by movies, but I don't believe each and every single German person is evil. I believe there are some good ones out there. So yeah, I thought that, I mean, that argument worked for me. Call me naive, so it worked. The women's right to choose argument felt a little muddled at times, but the distinction between the individual and the group, I thought that stood out for me. The one, the area when you brought up the social unrest in the 60s and 70s in Latin America gave perfect fodder for David to jump all over the whole Nicaragua, El Salvadorian stage. So I had good handling of that one. Good sarcasm as always, David. It was lovely to hear that. I thought your European battalions argument, had that been segued, it's fascinating, but had it been introduced as, since the government has introduced history, let's go into Europe, then it would have stood, but because there wasn't that segue, I thought it was interesting. The recruitment campaign about 2001 was very interesting, good. Galileo, yeah, I thought the bit about the Catholic Church supporting science could have been ripped apart a little bit more. Basically, again, you know, Galileo was turning his grave because the church, so and the pedophilia, celibacy doesn't equal pedophilia, scientifically speaking. They may in the Catholic Church, but not so. End of the day, I awarded it to the government, and I gave Gerry best leader. So there we go. So Stu, how should we award this one?
And what about the speaker, eh? Great, everyone.
I actually had
He gets the best speaker award.
I didn't know I was being adjudicated.
You did a good job.
Would have made me more nervous. So I think, I don't know if there's a precedent for this, there might be, but my inclination would be to use the popular vote as the tiebreak.
Yeah.
And it was a close one, but it gave it to the opposition by a score of 6-5.
Wow.
So,